And we're going to be using that same data to put in this report. So it makes more sense to finish. So remember, you don't have to duplicate data if it doesn't. That's going to be part of the treatment plant report that's going to come into or feed into this report. So it makes sense to finish that report first, not require them on the same day, because for some of my agencies who have 14 treatment plants, it is just a craziness. And then to allow that data to be used to fulfill the requirements of this report. So that's why that data.
Because we're using the treatment plant data.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why this is important.
My concern was that may represent treatment plant perspective of things, but my experience getting data from growers is that if you ask them to do anything during planting season, the busy season for them is usually February through August. You know, they get very unhappy. So
Interesting.
I don't know if Debbie took into consideration the growers' schedules when making that suggestion.
May I address the board?
I'm just looking at Tess's face on behalf of all growers in the state of California. What make the grower face on this point, Tess?
No, Tess, you have to come up.
Sorry.
As I understand this process, the growers are the use areas, and they're going to basically be providing the information to the administrators, right? And the administrator will then compile the information and submit it to the agency. So the question is, at what point in the process or the year does the administrator need the information from the growers? I will say we have typically in the ag orders tried to have the deadlines somewhere between February and March 15th, no later than March 15th, because that is when you really do start to get into the growing season. But again, I think part of that is, I don't know when the administrators would need the information from the users in order to compile it.
And this is the point I was
Thank
going
you.
to make. The change that you've proposed, I appreciate the additional flexibility in the permitting or the monitoring frequency. But, John, the way this permit reads now is that in the case of a system that has 4,000 connections, all 4,000 domestic residential users have to have reported their December activities.
Wait a second. I
No,
think
no.
that's ridiculous.
I agree.
No, they don't, because you're not going to send to each residential user and ask them to tell you how much they irrigated.
That's what the permit currently
No, it
requires.
says it can be combined,
It says that it can be
No, it says
aggregated.
aggregated.
computational purposes, not reporting purposes. This has been the problem the whole time.
No, I disagree with your interpretation, but we'll have our
Yeah,
legal
let's
staff.
see what it says.
You pointed out, can you find the language that concerns you?
Okay, so
For acreage calculation purposes, right above that table on on B3 from the Friday night version, it says use areas that consist of small lots may be aggregated to combine acreage for calculation purposes. It doesn't say for inspection purposes, and if the word for inspection and inspection was added there, I think that would take care of it.
I think that's what we meant. So
Not going to read the definition of use area because I thought we covered it under there as well.
Yes, we attempted to address this in the definitions for use area. It says an area of recycled water use with defined boundaries. Agricultural use areas may contain one or more facilities, ditch, irrigated fields, pumping stations, etc. Use areas may also consist of an aggregate of small lots, e.g. residential/industrial developments, roadway medians, etc.
Where are you?
We've
What
attempted to
page?
define the use areas to
This is on
include
page D4.
page D4, I'm sorry.
Oh, there you go.
I think, I appreciate that explanation, and I think in this context, we're understanding what we all mean here, but we're asking people who aren't here a number of years from now to make an interpretation. And it's going to get made in different ways by different EOs and different people reading this. And so I guess I would just ask that you insert the word "and inspection" after the word calculation in that sentence that precedes that, that table.
What page?
That is, at the bottom of page B3, there's a paragraph that starts, "The following shall be recorded for each user."
Yeah, that one be.
And then skip down one sentence. It says, "Use areas that consist of small lots," paren, defining it, close paren, "may be aggregated to combine acreage for calculation," and I would ask that you insert "and inspection."
One, on that point, since in the tables we use the word observation, not the word inspection.
Oh, thank
would,
you.
Would you, would it be
Thank you very much. Yeah.
appropriate to use the word observation?
Yes, thank
So
you.
you'd say, may be aggregated to combine acreage for observation and calculation purposes, or the other way around. That way it links to the table more cleanly. Does that sound good?
Yes, indeed, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got the second part about the calculation and observation. What was the previous one? And that, was that in the previous paragraph?
No, I'm sorry, that was
That
the
was it.
only
It was it.
addition that I was suggesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Since that's what we intended, I don't have any.
That's fine.
So just to be clear, it'll be the second full paragraph on page B4, and the sentence will read, "The following shall be recorded for each user with additional reporting for use areas as appropriate. Use areas that consist of small lots, e.g. residential industrial developments, roadway median irrigation, etc., may be aggregated to combine acreage for calculation or observation purposes. Use area monitoring shall be included in the following." Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Vicki.
I think we have some other concerns.
I don't have any concerns. I believe there was an additional sentence added in the change sheet that Vicki didn't read, that the frequency of inspection shall be based on complexity and
Oh.
risk.
Yeah.
So I
You're
wanted to
right.
make sure that was
You're
not
right.
being omitted. Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
To
It's like we have a celebrity guest. Beckman. That may mean that that's over.
So this was all related to when the report was due. And so bringing that back around to the issue of February 1st or April 1st, I think that our commenters made a couple of good points, that one, that these have to be submitted to the administrator, and the administrator has to put it in, and the administrator is going to be using the information from their
Wastewater
POTW
source.
plants that they are calculating at the same time. I don't have any problem with changing the date. It really, if they want April 1st, I don't have any real problem with that.
Right, and the ag users and others can just give the administrator the stuff
Data early.
before the planting season starts.
Right.
That's up to them.
I have a question on that. What would it be as a matter of practice, Dave? Just to get a sense of, you know, if you're getting this information and it's due April 1, when would you be asking the users to report?
I think typically a 30-day reporting window is given to users. And so this is, in this case, for users reporting, if we're in a quarterly reporting period, say they would need to report fourth quarter activities by the end of January, and that would allow the administrator to aggregate all that information, verify its accuracy because they have to stipulate to that before it's submitted, and so that would give them the months of February and March to assure the completeness of the report. That seems reasonable, and I thank Mr. Bishop for that.
would you like us to make that change? I'm getting some nodding heads, so.
I support that.
So,
April 1st.
I don't know, have that in front of me, which page that is, so that we can get that.
That's on page B6.
So on page B6, we will change February 1st to April 1st.
And it's not up on the board because it wasn't one of the sections we cut and pasted in the back room.
It's not a joke.
I know.
No, formatting a document that's been edited 3 times is not that easy.
No, I know, that's true. Didn't we also, someone made the point about on B6, all data versus all monitoring data? Did we make that
That was
change?
included.
Yes, I did, and I already gave that to Shirley.
Okay, good.
So I have a question on getting back to use area monitoring, not to beat a dead horse, but
No, go ahead.
so if the ag representatives here, Carrie and Tess, could take a look at this, I'm just looking at the language that we just modified, aggregation to combine acreage for calculation and observation, but that is related to use areas that consist of small lots, residential, industrial, et cetera. It does not have ag in here.
But the definition
don't
of
know-
use area in the back of the report includes agricultural. This is an EG, it's just
EG.
an example.
So since it's EG, why not just go ahead and include ag?
Sure, we can. Just wasn't.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if I can, just for clarity, if we're going to be playing around with this, I mean, the definition of use area on page D4 covers all this.
Yeah.
Perhaps the cleaner it would be to just strike the parenthetical here.
I know, but don't you think if we didn't put roadway median irrigation, we would have Bob Lucas showing up? Because that's kind of linear.
But he's not here right now, so let's do it.
Sorry.
Do you want to strike out the parenthetical statement? I see one nodding head.
So we have two
I
choices.
need at least 3 nodding heads.
We have two choices. We can either add so that the parenthetical matches the parenthetical in the use area.
Why don't you say C and then say where it is? Exactly. As described in blah. Or are there too many of those to make that worth it?
No, there's hardly any of those. We tried to avoid those because we knew we were going to be doing last-minute editing, and it makes it
Oh,
harder.
right,
But
that's-
now we're at the end, we can do that.
Okay, just do that. That's what I would do. Because you're directing people to where the definition is on that,
Yeah.
because it's not a term of
D4.
art.
So are you suggesting to add a specific reference to D4 here, or just deleting?
Yes.
Specific,
yes,
Because the term use area is used throughout the order.
Yeah, and
Oh.
we're getting into a
Yes,
little bit
that
of a
was our concern. That's why we defined it in one place, so you don't have to qualify
Okay.
each time.
Then, never mind.
So if you
It's not
do
that
strike the parenthetical, though, then I'm afraid you will have to add a phrase here, because we say small lots, which really only applies to residential and roadway, et cetera. And in the definition, you could say you need to add agricultural use areas that may contain more and more
Why
facilities.
can't you just say use areas may be aggregated?
Right. Why
about
does it have
that?
to say small lots?
Yeah,
Because
so-
we could have giant use areas.
May. We had, the operative word is may.
Right, right. So you either need to strike that consist of small lots along with the parenthetical, or you got to expand it to include agricultural to be
We weren't
consistent with the
necessarily
definition.
talking about Westland's irrigation district, for
Right.
instance.
Right.
So it does work very well if you take out and just say use areas that,
May be aggregated.
yeah, because it's in the, in there it describes both residential, small industrial parks, and agriculture.
Okay. Yeah, it's just odd to leave it out. Okay. Whichever.
You need to capitalize use area, please.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
Strike out.
Okay, I think that's all we have at this point, unless we want to go back and discuss previous areas.
Any other?
Mr. Smith, do you have more?
Thank you, Mr. Couch. Madam Chair, if I may, one of our suggested edits related to Prohibition A3, and that's on page 15 of the hard copy that I have in front of me that was issued on Friday night. And A3 says that recycled water shall not be allowed to escape from the use area as surface flow, et cetera. We have a definition of incidental runoff in the back of the order that says essentially small amounts will escape. That's what incidental means, as long as the site's being properly managed. But A3 does not explicitly exempt incidental runoff from the prohibition. So by my read, or a read, incidental runoff, although it's recognized in a permit, is still prohibited. And incidental runoff is going to happen. I don't believe it's the board's intent to prohibit incidental runoff. Anything that meets the definition of incidental runoff, I would think would be permitted, but A3 does not seem to exempt incidental runoff from that prohibition. And then new A5 recognizes the existence of incidental runoff occurring, but still does not, there's no rectification between the prohibition and A3. So what we had proposed was adding into the order the exception for incidental runoff. Recycled water shall not be allowed to escape from the use areas as surface flow that would either pond and or enter surface water unless it is incidental runoff or otherwise authorized by WDR's waivers, et cetera.
Right. So let me turn to staff and say why they didn't do that. We're not going to do everything you asked for. You know that. You've got that.
I don't
I just don't want to go
expect-
back over everything else, but this one's worth asking about.
That's why I brought it to your attention. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thanks for that judgment.
Chair Marcus?
I just didn't want to have to go through all the other ones and say no to you a few times. I was trying to avoid that.
My recollection is that when we did the statewide Phase 2 stormwater order, Region 9 was very concerned because they have a prohibition in their basin plan against incidental runoff. And, you know, I may be naive here, but unless someone can explain to me why it would be okay to have incidental runoff of recycled water when you don't have incidental runoff of potable water, I'm not sure why we would make this change.
Where do we decide
It's a-
in the document?
So we have now, now that Dave has brought it to our attention, I realize we have two different definitions of incidental runoff. We have one in this permit, and we have one in the recycled water policy. I agree that we should acknowledge that the recycled water policy laid out how you define incidental runoff, and it, if we were going to entertain his, it won't solve the problem in Region 9, who has a prohibition for all incidental runoff, which is somewhat impractical.
Yeah, somewhat.
But we could say, in that section that he was just describing, allow incidental runoff per the recycled water policy and take out our definition here, which is not consistent with the recycled water policy and as such.
So John, may I add a
Is that wrong?
clarification?
Michael,
Yeah,
you're
it's
giving
not
me a-
correct. We, actually, what we did, you know, we had that comment from several people. There's two prohibitions in one is A3 and one is current A5. A3 is specifically talking about surface flow. It's talking something that's beyond incidental. And then A5 is specifically incidental, and unless it got switched, we specifically actually, in the definition, the incidental runoff is defined to be consistent with the policy. And trying to address in A3 saying that this other prohibition doesn't apply, you do that, it was actually would have created a confusion with some commenters that we were actually treating surface flow as an incidental runoff. And we tried to combine those sections. We looked at the way the language, the suggestions were made, and with the additions that we have there with respect to irrigated lands, it made sense to keep those separately. And to the extent I remember, John, my intent was to make the definition of incidental runoff the same as what's in the policy. So if we failed to do that. we
No, it
can
is
do that.
exactly the same.
It's exact
Exa-
same
word for word.
definition.
It is? Okay.
The
Good
policy
check.
includes a volume,
In the definition?
yes.
What's the volume? Do you remember? You're trying to figure out how it's really incidental, right? As opposed to being a flow of concern, such as the kind that Ms. Edelman was talking about. You don't want it ponding, you don't want it regularly flowing, you don't want to have the concerns that were expressed by a number of the commenters be anything they really need to worry about.
Yeah. You know, I
least
appreciate
at the
Ms.
moment.
Farnock pointing out Prohibition A5, though, that we need to consider A3 in the context of A5, because A5 is pretty carefully worded.
Right.
And it takes the issue of incidental runoff head on. So to conflate the issue with A3, I think is problematic.
Yeah.
Well, and then the definition in the back for incidental runoff, the example that's given is the small volume, unintended small amounts, volume of runoff from recycled water use areas, such as unintended minimal overspray from sprinklers that escapes the recycled water use area.
That sounds right. Where is it?
That's on page where'd I go? D3.
Why am I not seeing it?
Is this what you got just today? In blue on D3? Here.
So,
Oh, there it is. It's in blue. That's why I couldn't see it. Sorry, it's right there.
so the difference that I was describing between this and this is exactly the first sentence of the incidental runoff definition in the recycled water policy. It goes on to explain what that minimum volume means in the recycled water
So
policy.
can you just add that in here?
Well, it's like a page. It's very,
Or you could refer to it.
yeah, I would suggest that we just refer to it.
That's fine. I think. Is that fine?
That's fine.
Okay.
Doesn't that, I wasn't here for that policy, but doesn't that, that policy does not apply to agriculture. So as long as somebody looks at it and sees if there's anything
That would be
in there. Well, I don't know. I mean, if the policy was developed without having agriculture in mind, I'm just not wanting to get locked into something that would, this seems fine, what's in here now, but if we look at, yeah, John? Yeah, I'm just saying that the recycle policy was not, it did not include agriculture.
Yeah, but this
So if
doesn't-
there's
this-
something in that one-page document that.
No,
would-
this incidental runoff doesn't apply to agriculture because we already said that there is permits for irrigated agricultural runoff that allow, if it's allowed under that, which it is, under those permits, then it's allowed. So this only applies to non-agricultural incidental runoff.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. That's in, on page 16, number 5. A5, yeah, okay.
Could A5 be modified to explicitly allow incidental runoff? Because it doesn't do that. If I respect the notion that A3, don't want to tinker with that, but if A5 was modified to say that incidental runoff of recycled water is not prohibited and shall not, or but shall not. Because right now, it isn't, it's prohibited.
I I don't think I agree with that statement. I think how it's phrased provides for incidental runoff as contemplated in the
Okay,
recycled
well,
water
this is in the
policy.
prohibitions section.
Right, but it explains
So
the
it
context.
prohibits impacts of incidental runoff. And incidental runoff is included among waters that escape from sites in A3, and A3 prohibits water from escaping sites. So it's not allowed.
Doesn't escape
in
a site.
A3,
It needs to, if
and
it
it's not
ponds or
allowed in
enters
A5.
surface water.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
It's it's at a certain level, right?
And incidental runoff, by virtue of its definition, has to be small amounts and resulting from still adequate management of a site. But I'm just looking at these prohibitions, and nowhere in here is incidental runoff exempted from any of these prohibitions.
We don't usually put exemptions in the prohibition sections of any permit I've ever worked on.
Okay, but that still leaves it prohibited. I'm
I don't
open to
see
the
that.
solution, but the problem remains.
Okay, I don't agree with the interpretation. I think there's an implicit allowance that's in this language.
Okay? Hope future EOs agree with that.
Do you have any further?
Well, all I was going to say is I have a little bit of consternation cross-referencing the definition of incidental use that is within the recycled water policy,
Okay.
because it occurs actually in a section of the policy that describes control practices, and it's listed as examples of control practices to implement the incidental use, or the
Incidental runoff, you mean?
Yes.
Right.
And so
Right, oh, right.
I think the standalone definition that's provided on page D4 of the general order, the proposed general order that staff have before you, is sufficient and provides the necessary flexibility without kind of tethering back to all the different control measures that are identified in the recycled water policy.
All right.
Now,
and-
that's
yep.
just my quick take. If John's comfortable with that still.
I'm fine with that.
You think that's okay? How about allaying his fear?
So I'm going to turn that over to Michael, because it
Yeah.
seems to me that you wouldn't say incidental runoff of recycled water shall not result in water quality less than if you were saying you couldn't have any
Right.
incidental runoff.
That would be the,
But I'm
right.
not, that's why we have him.
and
Yeah,
that
I
you're
mean,
not supposed to let it
from my-
pond or run off.
From my perspective, I think Shala has done a good job describing how these are supposed to operate together. I'll be honest, I view it through a slightly different lens than Board Member Moore. I think that, A3 is designed to identify that in general, it's prohibited. And A5 is a recognition, and, despite all the good efforts of the recycled water community, that there will be times where there's incidental runoff, and when that does occur, these are the factors that we need to ensure are addressed through a more tailored prohibition. And so I do see A3 and A5 as working together. And A3 essentially being a tool that really drives home the point that there shouldn't even be runoff from these sites. And there's a tension here that, it hasn't been discussed extensively today, except I suppose in reference to some of the comments from CCKA of, this is a waste discharge requirement permit. It's not designed to authorize any activity that actually
Right.
discharges to a water of the United States, which would implicate the NPDES Clean Water Act authority. And so I think your staff have done a very good job of navigating a very tight channel there to allow these prohibitions to act in tandem.
Well, okay, that is helpful. I mean, I think what we're looking at is how do you avoid the folks who are not the good housekeeping folks and the folks who are not conscious of the fact that it can have an impact on surface waters for some of the reasons that CCK and others have said today, and that we're trying to grow the movement, and part of that has to do with good behavior. So you're saying 3 in tandem with 5, then we'll give the regional boards the tools they need to go after the bad housekeeping people.
Correct.
I don't know that they'd spend time on truly incidental
And that-
overrun. I can't imagine why
And
they
that's
would do
exactly
that.
the point. I mean, it would have to be a discretionary enforcement action, if if the water recycling community is concerned about a particular executive officer taking action, obviously be subject to not only review by the regional board in terms of, following through with an enforcement action, but then ultimately by this board. And so I think between the two prohibitions acting in tandem, there's pretty clear direction as to where this is supposed to go.
Right.
That's good, and yeah, and I agree with Mr. Lawfer in terms of, that was much better stated. The term I used was allowance. It's a kind of strong term, there really is a prohibition because this is not an NPDES permit, so I really want to concur with that analysis.
Yeah, I'm a little more comfortable with that. All right, are there any other questions, direction? All right. I'd like someone to make a motion, but I'd also like it to have the 2 points, and I tried scribbling while you were scribbling. And I'm chairing the meeting, so I'm not going to make the motion, but can I help you articulate the motion that I'd like to see and hopefully someone will make? Tell me what I'm supposed to do here, boss.
Is this you show me yours and I'll show you mine?
Yeah.
So
I have confidence that yours will be clearer than mine.
mine's going to be long-winded, if nothing else, because I want to try to capture a lot of the ideas I heard from various board members.
All right.
But on any motion, and anybody can feel free to reference back to what I say and not have to repeat all of this.
Yeah.
But first of all, it would reflect the change sheet that staff had
Right.
circulated last Friday, as well as the changes that were shown up on the board, what we're styling as change sheet number 2, including the subsequent amendments based on the dialogue. In addition, I think there were 2 amendments that did not get reflected in change sheet number 2 up on the board. The first is on attachment page, or attachment A, page A2, and maybe Shirley was good and actually got this in while we were talking. Section 2B3, there was an "and" that was changed to an "or." If you're
Right.
looking at change sheet number 1, it's the second to the last line on page A2. The "and" periodic inspections becomes "or" periodic inspections. And then the other change that didn't make it up onto the board, I believe, but was read into the record is on page B6. And there actually are 2 changes there. At least one of them may have actually made it into the change sheet as displayed. The first change is to change the February 1st date to April 1st at the top of page B6. And then in A4 on that same page of, and this is page B6, it's tabular and graphical summaries of all monitoring data. I believe that was read into the record. So that was the suite of changes. The motion would be for the board to adopt the order with those changes as read into the record. As well, the motion would indicate that the state board or water board staff will post information or post on the water board's website information pertaining to notices of intent filed pursuant to this order, as well as notices of applicability. Third element of the motion would be that by July 2015, so that's 1 year out, by July 2015, State Water Board staff shall report back to the State Water Board at a public workshop on implementation of the general order, period. The report shall include information on enrollments, acre-feet of recycled water applied under the order, recycled water applied under other recycled water orders, comma, data gaps, comma, the need for revisions to protect public health, safety, and the environment, comma, and the need for revisions to promote recycled water use, period.
So moved as read into the record
Wait,
by
wait.
Mr. Laufer.
Will you wait a sec? Do we want to add something about monitoring or some of the things we talked about? Monitoring, level of enforcement, level of inspections, just so we can see what's actually happening? For the
So
report.
are you suggesting that we report back on any changes authorized by the executive officer to the monitoring program? Is that what you're?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I kind of want the story back on how this is being used and where executive officers have, I'd like a sense of how many have made the findings and said it has to be a WDR, how many, I mean, just basic, how this goes as a general permit, level of inspection, et cetera, level of enforcement. You'd like to see that folks are monitoring and that there's enforcement, stuff like that. a general picture back on the kinds of, the full suite of issues on implementation.
And I tried to capture that generally. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't
you
know if
did
the
generally.
easiest thing is to say at the end, and other relevant issues related to implementation of the order. That would capture enforcement, as well as the other reporting elements. But if you like, it can certainly, we know what you want. This isn't going to be in the order at this point in time, and I expect Tom and John will still be around. So they will be providing key guidance to the staff next year on what you want back. It's very clear you all want a comprehensive assessment of what's happened in the first year under the
Right,
general
that's,
order.
yeah, that's exactly right. On all these issues we've discussed.
So the one issue that concerns me in that is all other recycling outside of this order is not an easy task for us to do, because not all of our permits require that kind of information back to us. And so I'm a little bit concerned about the completeness of that portion of your report back, just so you
Right.
know.
Well, I was interested in a sense of how many, to the extent people have done an NOI or tried to do that, and then the executive officer does the findings and then does a WDR instead.
I don't have any problem with that part of it.
Right.
But there was in what Michael read, it said the amount of recycled water from all other permits or something to that effect, and that's going to be difficult.
I would just say, though, it helps to kind of put it into context to the extent, just general information.
Yeah, do the best you can. You want to get that info eventually.
Survey similar to this about a year or two ago,
good.
and the only way we found we could do it was to send out letters of inquiry and phone calls to every wastewater treatment plant we could find, and so it took a lot of time. But if the board wants us to try to redo it again,
No.
we
Don't
can.
they all have permits anyway? Don't the regional boards have those permits on file? But that doesn't mean that's what they're actually doing,
It's not
right?
aggregated in some way that we can pull it out of our data systems that allows us to.
We have Rich Mill in the room, Mills in the room, and we had, Dan was here earlier, and there is a plan to update the numbers on recycled water, as was done several years ago, and it's to be done in 2015. Perfect
Oh, good.
timing.
That's great.
And so,
Good.
Rich, do we have your commitment that you will be working with Dan to make sure this happens? Oh, that's not good. Okay. No, that's not as
Well,
good.
that's okay, but if we know it's coming, we'll get it. That'll be the next tranche. Okay. All right, so Mr. Loffer, how do you want to change your language so that he doesn't have a conniption over there? Since we know we'll get it at the end of the year.
Well, I didn't actually require the staff to report back on the exact amount used, but just generally water applied under other recycled water orders. But that could be stricken, and then we just at the end include and all other relevant information pertaining to implementation of this general order, which
Okay.
will give us the opportunity to give you a comprehensive picture on what's going on in terms of implementing, and that would include enforcement, of course.
So may I amend my motion to include that last additional language from Mr. Laufer?
Thank you, Board Member Dodek. Is there,
Anything, Madam Chair.
is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, it carries. Thank you all for the good work, including those of you out there on all sides of this issue, and it has many sides. It's
But
not two.
Adjourn. I would like for John and Vicki to talk with, I guess Dan is in DFA. We have the 2009 information, plus 5 is 14. Why we aren't doing this in 2015 using calendar year 2014, it makes some sense to me. I appreciate that for DWR that may be a problem, but just if you could check to see what you can do to get those numbers, because those numbers are very important. They're important for the drought. They're important for showing how much or how little and it was little that we found out about 2009, how little recycled water is being used.
Your new chief of DFA is sitting over there and has helped us with the agricultural portions of this order.
Darren?
And I note that he is typing on his keyboard.
He's putting it on his calendar, as a matter of
Do
fact.
what you can to sort of grease the palms of Rich and others, so.
And just to be clear, I think people have done a great job of this. Part of my intent in the report back and trying to say that is that there are many things that have been requested out of an abundance of caution, either that EOs will be too tough on recycling or that they won't be tough enough and that fish will have an impact. All those things people are worried about. I want the report back to see if there's anything to worry about, as opposed to piling on all the things that people were asking for on all sides of the issue. And then we'll review it. If the fears come to pass, we'll figure out either how to deal with this or deal with the issue in a case-by-case basis. All right, I believe the meeting is adjourned unless I've forgotten anything. Are we good? Thank you all. See you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Mike's off.